Yeah, am I audible?
Yes.
Yep. I think we can begin now. Professor Mohapatra can join us eventually. So, namaskar and good morning to all joining us today from New Delhi and different parts of India and the West Asian region, obviously. I am Manish Dabhade here, and I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of the Indian Futures. I take this opportunity to welcome you all today on behalf of the Indian Futures. I cannot but begin by hoping that you and your loved ones, your family, are safe and healthy. Let me at the outset introduce the Indian Futures very briefly. We are a New Delhi-based independent organization that started out in January 2016 with the sole aim of creating a global platform to plainly and dispassionately discuss, in the truest ancient Indian tradition of a samvad, a dialogue, the ideas of new India in all their varied dimensions and contestations. Now, the idea is to go beyond the headlines of the day and have an honest, a deep dive conversation amongst the thinking community in India and abroad. The idea was and is to organize, probe, stimulate, and at times provoke our minds on a contemporary theme of critical relevance to India and the world. We are extremely proud to have recently hosted some of India's finest minds from the world of government, politics, academia, diplomacy, and culture. Sri Suresh Prabhu, former cabinet minister, Shri Devendra Fadnavis, former chief minister of Maharashtra, Dr. Vinay Sahasrabudhe, president of ICCR, Shri Sunil Ambekarji, BJP General Secretaries B.L. Santoshji, Muraleedharan Raoji, Ram Madhavji, Ambassador P.S. Raghavan, who is now the chairman of the National Security Advisory Board, Ambassador Vijay Gokhale, recently retired Foreign Secretary of India, Ambassador Gautam Bambawale, Professor Raja Mohan, Professor Makarand Paranjpe, Yamini Iyer, and Rajdeep Sardesai are just a few, and only a few I've named here. I'm especially delighted to let you all know that we are joined today as associate partners, very importantly from the stakeholders for what we're doing today, Millennial India International Chambers of Commerce, Industry and Agriculture, and the embassies of Israel and the embassy of UAE. Let me now very briefly flag the rationale of our authors' international conference for today morning. Despite being understated and underanalyzed, there is at some level a larger consensus amongst the strategic community globally, that Prime Minister Modi has in recent years achieved an impossible feat of sorts. On the one hand, he has brought the ongoing India-Israel close bonds, very close ties, out of the closet with his very historic trip to Israel in 2017, a first by an Indian Prime Minister since India's recognition of Israel on 17th September 1950, that ages ago. On the other hand, Indian diplomacy under Prime Minister Modi surged ahead in forging a tighter relationship with the other powers in the West Asian geopolitical theater. Many locked, in fact, in a conflict with Israel, such as Iran, Saudi Arabia, and UAE. So we all witnessed Israel Prime Minister's visit to India just 6 months after PM Modi's visit to Israel, and Prime Minister Modi receiving highest civilian awards from Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Bahrain. This was possible only due to Prime Minister Modi's personal stamp and sharp, very sharp political instincts that shattered the so-called hesitations of history, which is now a common phrase. Also, excessive political baggages of the past, and without any doubt, smart diplomacy. With this, I now invite my dear friend, Dr. Khushnam, who is also the Indian Futures Director of Research and the co-editor of the soon-to-be published edited volume on India and West Asia, the Modi Years, to introduce the research project for all of us here. Over to you, Khushnam.
Thank you, Manish. Namaste and very good morning to all. Honorable Shri V. Muraleedharan, Minister of State for External Affairs, Parliament and Parliamentary Affairs, respected Professor Aswini Kumar Mohapatra, Dean of School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, Shri Manish Dabhade, Founder and Editor-in-Chief, The Indian Future, Mrs. Bhavna Dabhade, Founder in The Indian Future, and all other present and joining the stream session in the stream. I'm here with a brief outline of our edited volume project, India and West Asia, the Modi Years, to ensure an informed context at the very outset. As Manish said, the very coming of the government of Prime Minister Modi in 2014 is not a mere change of the government. It signifies a marked shift in the vision of the governance and the global aspiration, which is perceptible in all the policy endeavors and actions of the government. There is a growing confidence in the nation's capabilities, which is reflected in the changing stature of India at the global stage. The rising national sentiments and aspirations have found commensurate and appropriate change in the foreign policy vision and priority directions as well. The changes have gained profound momentum in the post-2014 Indian policy vision, the Modi years. India has moved from its non-aligned past. This marks break with the past ideological approach, and Indian foreign policy is now being characterized by strategic autonomy and multi-aligned approach based on issues of national interest and priority vision and dynamically assertive global aspirations. The region of West Asia gained focused attention in India's policy approach with Prime Minister Narendra Modi's remark in the quote in Make in India conference in New Delhi 2014, when he said, I quote, "For a long time, look is policy under discussion. I would like to talk about Link West," unquote. After that, the neighborhood first and the extended neighborhood policy has been the pivot of Modi government. The region of West Asia has assumed focused under these policy visions based on our very pragmatic perception of regional stability, energy security, imperatives of economic pursuits, India's continental security, and the maritime security of Indian Ocean, which is inextricably linked with the security of the Gulf and the Arabian Peninsula. In his speech in Raisana Dialogue in 2016, Dr. S. Jaishankar, the then Foreign Secretary of India, said that the region already abound in Indian footprints has importance of is concern for India. An overview makes it apparent that West Asia sits at the geostrategic center of the world and its world politics. The region is the scene of conflict involved with the regional external powers, but located in the immediate neighborhood, West Asia assumes natural strategic salience for India. That is of profound significance for our energy security, which also hosts a huge Indian diaspora. The rivalry among the regional countries and the expansion of in the region. But the recent diplomatic outreach and the dense visit of Prime Minister Modi has brought the significant change in the strategic thinking of the region as well. Now they also have started seeing India as a large promising for shared future of security, stability, and prosperity. Despite the pandemic, the recent visit of our high-level visits from India, from Shri Rajnath Singh, Dr. S. Jaishankar, Tehran, and then we have the 2020 ended with the visit of our External Affairs Minister in Qatar in 27th and 28th of December. With this, the intent, I would like to come to the point of the intent of the project. The intent of the project is to bring together the best minds in academia, insights of the strategic community, experiences of the diplomatic fraternity, and expertise of area specialists to come up with an analytical view and perspective on different aspects or themes of the project. Their enriched contribution will take us to the ultimate goal of pragmatic vision and roadmap to establish India in this strategic region as a credible factor of stability to pursue its national interest and global aspirations. The project pursues to understand what are the core policies and the pragmatic vision of India towards the region, how far the Indian policy under Modi government have been to adjust India in the how to maintain the strategic balance of interest among the rival partners like Saudi Arabia, Iran, Israel. How far India can go in order to ensure security in the Gulf, which is inextricably linked with the maritime security of Indian Ocean, what and how much role India can play in the region like Palestine, GCC, and Iran, Israel. What are the incentives India can offer to the economic diversity we can drive information technology, space aspiration, and artificial intelligence vision in the region? The project seeks through its different parts and the chapters an analysis of the interest in the region, the policy vision of Modi government, major trends of these years, potential challenges and opportunities. We are looking forward to an enlightening session of the Authors International Conference to make the project a blueprint for India's desired position in the region and pursuit to power in the changing geopolitical landscape in the region and the emerging world order. With these words, I take this opportunity to welcome you all to this inaugural session and thank everyone here for your presence in our project of the edited volume, India and West Asia, the Modi years. Thank you. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat. Over to you, Manish.
Yeah, thank you, Khushnam. We are truly privileged now to have with us Shri V. Muraleedharan ji, Honorable Minister of State, the Minister of External Affairs, Minister of External Affairs and Parliamentary Affairs for the inaugural address today morning. Muraleedharan ji, hailing from Kerala, is a member of Parliament, Rajya Sabha from my state of Maharashtra, and I'm happy about it, and is also a member committee on External Affairs and member consultative committee for the Ministry of Railways. I personally known him for many years now, and he has always been very encouraging and supportive of various TIF endeavors. It's truly an honor to have you, sir, with us, especially knowing your very loaded national and international schedules. Thanks again, sir, for this privilege. Over to you, Honorable Muraleedharan ji, for today's inaugural address. And please connect to Muraleedharan ji, please.
His Excellency Dr. Ahmad Al-Banna, Ambassador of UAE to India, His Excellency Ambassador Ron Malka, Ambassador of Israel to India, Professor Manish Dabhade, Founder, The Indian Futures, Professor Aswini Mohapatra, Dean, School of International Studies, JNU, members of the Millennial India International Chamber of Commerce, distinguished guests, friends, good morning to you all. I am very happy to join you in this conference, focusing on India's relations with West Asia in recent years. This is a topic of great contemporary relevance as we keep seeing various important developments in this region which impact geopolitics. In recent months also, there have been several such developments, including normalization of relations between various countries in the West Asia region. For India, West Asia assumes natural strategic salience by sheer virtue of its location in our immediate western neighborhood. The region is also of paramount significance to us as a growing nation to meet our energy security needs, as also for the large number of Indians living in the region and trade and investment linkages between India and the countries of the West Asia. India's connect with West Asia is rooted deep in history. Linkages that have transcended borders across many centuries to include key elements of trade, cultural contacts, and people-to-people exchanges. Today, the region hosts substantial Indian diaspora who act as the living bridge between West Asia and India. Notwithstanding our bilateral engagement with the region in more recent decades were arguably limited in scope and intensity. They lacked the requisite depth which is necessary for a mutually beneficial and sustained relationship. Fresh momentum was injected into India's foreign policy approach towards West Asia when Prime Minister Modi remarked at the Make in India conference in New Delhi on 26 September 2014, when he said, I quote, "For a long time, Look East policy is under discussion. I would like to talk about Link West," unquote. Our government, under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi and his vision of an extended neighborhood, has helped strengthen India's ties with the region. It can be seen, for example, from the fact that Prime Minister Modi's visit to UAE in 2015 was the first visit of an Indian Prime Minister to the country in 34 years. Our strategic partnership with countries of the region has gained unprecedented momentum since 2014. This includes the countries of the GCC as well as our other friends. High-level political visits, unprecedented diplomatic outreach, our cooperation with countries of the region, all this demonstrate our policy priority for this region. Prime Minister has visited almost each of the countries of the Gulf. He has visited Gulf countries 8 times since 2014. And we have also hosted highest leadership from these countries in India. Prime Minister has also visited Israel and Palestine. Even during the COVID-19 pandemic, this intensive engagement has continued with Prime Minister himself talking to the leaders of the region on a regular basis. Our Prime Minister has created a special bond of respect and trust with the leaderships in the region. This has been duly recognized by various countries. The conferment of the highest civilian awards by UAE, Saudi Arabia and Bahrain on Prime Minister Modi is a testimony of the way he has contributed to taking India's bilateral relations with these countries to newer heights. We can say that a new robust foundation to elevate our relationships in the region has been created, where India can be a factor of stability in the region in consonance with our national interests. As External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar said in his speech at the Raisina Dialogue, the region already abounds Dr. S. Jaishankar visited Bahrain and UAE in November 2020 and to Qatar in December. I also visited Oman in December 2020 and am in UAE today recording this message for your event. As our relations with the countries of West Asia have gained newer heights under Prime Minister Modi, several strategic aspects have got added to our relationship with different countries. Our bilateral cooperation on defense and security has also strengthened. There is also good cooperation on important issues like counter-terrorism and maritime security. Joint defense exercises have been held with some countries. Indian Army Chief General Narawane recently paid a visit to UAE and Saudi Arabia in December 2020. Trade and investment has been one of the most important features of India's relations with West Asia. This area has seen special focus in recent years, with several countries of the Gulf looking at investments into India in a win-win proposition for both sides. Sovereign wealth funds from UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar and Kuwait are all committed to making substantial investments in India. This includes Abu Dhabi Investment Authority and Mubadala from UAE, PIF from Saudi Arabia and QIA and KIA. This change has been brought about by their new confidence in India, brought about by a series of reforms in various sectors by our government, which is reflected in the rise in India's ease of doing business rankings. As we bring in more reforms, I am sure India will continue to attract further FDI from the Gulf. Our trade relations is also going to continue to be strong. Our energy relationship has also moved from a mere transactional buyer-seller relationship to a more comprehensive partnership with various countries. UAE became the first country to participate in India's strategic petroleum reserves in 2018. It has also given concession to Indian companies in one of its oil fields. Similarly, our energy relationship has also progressed with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and other countries. Iraq and Kuwait remain large and reliable sources of oil for India. Some of the contemporary and futuristic areas of mutual cooperation include information technology, cooperation in outer space, agriculture, and artificial intelligence. We have a lot more to achieve together. In light of India's economic ambitions and development trajectory, coupled with the economic diversification drive in the Gulf states in particular, we would continue to work with these countries on issues of health security and food security, which have acquired great importance today. When we talk of West Asia, we have to naturally acknowledge the great contribution of our diaspora in these countries, both for India as well as for the development of these countries. Our government has taken special care for the Indian diaspora, especially our workers, such as through eMigrate, Madad, and Rishta portals, as well as expanding the scope of ICWF. India is working with GCC countries on issues like skill harmonization to prepare a better future for our workers. The needs of the Indian community in these countries are also being better understood and met. For example, UAE has allotted land for a Hindu temple in Abu Dhabi. UAE and Oman have also for the first time allowed visa on arrival for some categories of Indian visitors. The Indian community has appreciated all the efforts of our government for their welfare, including during COVID-19. Prime Minister Modi has instilled a new confidence and pride in them. During COVID-19, we have brought back lakhs of Indians through Vande Bharat mission. The community was looked after well by the host countries, which is a reflection of our relations with these countries and their appreciation of the contribution of our people. Our air bubble arrangements with most GCC countries have also allowed our workers and professionals to go back and resume work. India's help in ensuring that supply chains of essentials like food and medicine from India to the Gulf countries during our lockdown has been highly appreciated. Overall, I would like to reiterate that India's relations with West Asia have assumed new dynamism and content under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi. In addition, the Abraham Accords and the latest Al-Ula agreement between the GCC countries has produced a new realignment pattern and therefore a new congenial strategic setting in the region for India. We have welcomed the rapprochement and reconciliation among countries in West Asia, and we are hopeful that this would bring more peace and progress in the region. We also remain committed to the Palestinian cause and hope for early resumption of direct negotiations for an acceptable two-state solution. Let me end by saying that I am delighted to be part of the discussions here today. I believe platforms such as these provide for the perfect amalgamation of the best ideas from academia and the rich experiences of diplomats from the region. I wish the editors, all the authors, and others associated with the project in one way or the other all the very best. Let us together add a new and significant dimension to India's relations with the West Asian region, one that is characterized by robust mutual cooperation and that thrives towards a shared future of security, prosperity, and stability. Namaskar to all of you and Jai Hind.
Yes, thank you. I hope I'm audible. Yeah. Thanks, Muraleedharan, for this very brilliant inaugural address for us. You superbly brought out the significance of the West Asian region for India and the recent very significant strides and gains made under Prime Minister Modi's smart and proactive diplomacy. Thanks again for taking time out to deliver this inaugural address. After this, I now invite my senior colleague, Professor Aswini Mohapatra, who is now the Dean of the School of International Studies at JNU, to deliver his keynote address. Professor Mohapatra is, surely as all know, is India's leading scholar on West Asia and is known globally for his academic contributions and leadership. He has always been very generous with his knowledge and time, especially with relatively younger colleagues like me and Khushnam. Thanks, sir, for kindly agreeing to speak with us today. So without any further ado, I now hand over to Professor Mohapatra. Over to you, sir. So please unmute. Please unmute, sir. So please. Yes, sir. Please unmute yourself. Yeah,
Yes,
you
yes,
can.
yes. It's done now. Yeah. Hello. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please
Can
go
you
ahead.
hear?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Thank you very much. My senior colleague, Dr. Manish, my student, center student, the coordinator of the authors conference, Dr. Khushnam. I think my senior colleague, I can see here, Professor Egregious Pant is here, and the Honorable Minister, Shri Muraleedharan ji. And as usual, he's very dynamic, and as the way he presented his lecture that covers of almost all facets of India's relation with West Asian country in last 6 years under the dynamic leadership of charismatic Prime Minister Modi. I think there's a very good effort on your part to make a dispassionate assessment of India's West Asia policy last 6 years. As an academician, sometimes we tend to, overemphasize the structural aspect when you try to explain a particular social phenomenon or change a continuity in the foreign policy behavior of a middle-ranking power or ascendant power like India. That is something we do not do it intentionally. This has been the trend in social sciences, especially in international relation as a subdiscipline of social science. There is too much of focus on structure. And that's the way the IR as a discipline evolved in the aftermath of the World War II, centered around what is known as the hegemonic stability. That is, a one superpower as maintaining and ensuring the continuation of the post-World War international system, what they call liberal international order, and to an extent also capitalist in economic terms. So, but with the turn of the century, with the transformational changes taking place and the dramatic shift in alliance pattern occurring, there is a perceptible shift in our explanation analysis from structure to agency. The essential factors are as much important and at times more important than simply structural aspect of it as an explanatory variable. In other words, we always try to give less weightage or explanatory weightage to the essential factor. Essential factor largely refers to the leadership. Leadership in terms of the leadership skill, in terms of leadership vision, in terms of leadership idea, basically what I call innovative ideas, and the kind of influence that leader sometimes enjoys because of the innovative and the visionary idea that the leader has. This also reflected when you analyze the foreign policy behavior of a country through the uh, system analysis. Foreign policy is not simply kind of the summary of countries' bilateral relation with various other countries. It's more than that. The very formulation of foreign policy involves also an individual, the individual who is at the top of the pyramid, at the top of the structure. Okay. And when you analyze the individual, basically look at the idiosyncrasies of the individual. So the idiosyncrasies as a factor was often ignored by the foreign policy analyst. And when you try to understand or the individual role in the foreign policy making in bringing up a shift or a change or overhauling in the foreign policy behavior, we need to understand the role discharged by the man at the top. Okay. So in the broader conceptual framework, I find your conference in the book on India and West Asia under Modi years, that is Prime Minister Modi, is quite relevant. So analytically, definitely, it's a kind of path breaking because here you focus on the individual who is at the top or who is in the driver's seat. So here, when you try to analyze the structural factor, you also try to bring in the agential aspect of it to have a better and comprehensive analysis of the change in India's West Asia policy, right? One, when you try to make an assessment, we also need to make a comparison of what was India's policy, foreign policy as a whole before 2014, before rise of BJP to power, NDA 2 to power, or what was India's West Asia policy under the chronically unstable UPA rule for 10 years, following a relatively stable rule and a stable rule and a kind of visionary leadership provided by late Atal Bihari Vajpayee. That is quite perceptible. You don't have to actually make an assessment, go around and collecting data about it, you see. So, India's status was elevated in 2001, 2002. And so it came to 2007 onwards, we are simply, groping in the darkness. We don't know what to do. This is very much reflected in UPA policy up to 2014. If you study the UPA policy response to the crisis in West Asia at a time when the American influence was on decline and the region was turning more multipolar, with China emerging the major beneficiary, and at a time the West Asia emerged as the arena of conflict, on one of the worst conflict zone after Afghanistan. So you had a multiple conflict sites from 2012 onwards. So what was India's role, India's response? Its voice actually lost that kind of, that worthiness. Whether in United Nations, you'll find a series of flip-flops. So for the India's response, India's position in United Nations or various West Asian issues was concerned. So by 2015, when Prime Minister Modi paid a visit to UAE, you find a kind of remarkable change, more definite, defined, visible. What I call the Indian foreign policy trajectory as a whole, as a part of what Prime Minister Modi called the universal engagement. So his whole policy perspective, what is well encapsulated in a speech called Link West, has to be seen in a broader perspective, broader approach called the universal engagement. So first visit to UAE in 34 years. I think that could be partly because the way we had looked at the Gulf countries. Okay. We basically try to define very conventional terms the relationship with the Gulf countries, as Minister rightly mentioned it, the bilateral relationship, a kind of economic interdependence, nothing beyond it, even if they are located in as a neighbor as a maritime neighbor. So we used to what I call talk a lot about civilizational linkages, historical footprint, but did we do enough to translate the lingering influence in terms of kind of strategic gains? Did we do enough to create the condition so that we would have been in a position to counter the growing influence of China, which is emerging as a like global economic power, already had surpassed Japan in 2008. So we in a way, we didn't have this kind of foresight. That was lacking, not only in the political leadership, also in the foreign policy establishment of India, unfortunately. It was simply business as usual. There was no innovativeness involved. There was no vision. There was a long-term foreign policy perspective drawn up. It's simply responses, ad hoc responses to contingencies. But that is something, which used to bother us a lot for last 10 years. So what has happened in the last 6 years is you find a kind of concrete, roadmap. Yes, there are unusual developments as it happened in 2020, something people never had anticipated before, something you never could visualize anytime before, but you have a kind of clear-cut roadmap ahead. How do you go about it? How do you look at these countries? So I would like to remind you about Prime Minister's visit in 2015 to the Gulf countries. What was the thing that he said? Beyond transforming the bilateral relation purely in economic terms, making it more comprehensive security strategic ties, he also emphasized the need for elimination of ideological roots of global terrorism. And 6 years down the line, has he not been successful? Isn't that so-called Wahhabism and all lot of things used to be seen by the analysts, including me, as the core or the source of justification of the what I call the killing of innocent bystanders in the name of a particular religion, and the way it was appropriated by a chronically unstable neighbor, which is artificially created and which is permanently involved in a kind of bilateral conflict with India, the so-called proxy war. So this 6 years down the line, you see where Pakistan today and where India is. This way has, in a way, I tell you, dispelled much of the misgivings or suspicion, apprehension, anxiety that Prime Minister Modi's visit to the Gulf had raised, particularly in some circle, media circle that time, that our proximity, closeness to the Arab Gulf countries may entail the risk of undermining the historical civilizational ties with Iran. It didn't happen. In 2016, he had the historic agreement with Iran and the product of Hezd Chahwar. But then we realized a couple of years down the line that because of the systemic changes that has happened in what is well characterized as the transition, the global power transition, where the established hegemon status being challenged by the ascendant or the rising power like China. So in a given situation, India is required to define its own status, its location, its relation once again, because that becomes, policy-wise imperative for India. So this also to an extent involves the risk of dilution or say compromise with a well-established policy of strategic autonomy. That also to an extent posed challenge to our policy pursuit of multi-alignment. This also poses a challenge to Indian foreign policy in terms of striking balance in its relation with the both sides in West Asia. Because the West Asia, as you know, is, it's not simply divided along sectarian line. It's divided along various lines, whether it is structurally, ethnically, or clan-wise, or religiously. You have that kind of division. And there are quite a few reasons for that. And it's extremely difficult for the Indian foreign policy makers to overcome that, because that's a reality. And we have to negotiate our policy in the given realities. The division that you find today, they are there 20 years before, 30 years before. When I started studying West Asia, they continue to be there. And the major source of, hurdle in shaping up a kind of permanent policy response of West Asia policy. You have this region, sometimes I characterize as a kind of shifting sense. You have the shifting alliances. Alliances are not fixed. Nobody ever imagined, say about 5 years before or 2 years before, that could be accord like Abraham Accord, leading to normalization of relation between Israel on the one side and the Arab state on the other. See, nobody ever, at least I never thought about that there would be a time when Turkey would assert itself as a new caliphate. Okay, a country under the leadership of a maverick Erdogan is claiming territory not only in West Asia and Europe, 5 million square kilometers. They say that once upon a time had been part and parcel of the Ottoman Empire. The whole concept of, say the blue water, that's called the, this kind of concept, you see, has brought Turkey into a conflictual relation with other countries. So things are changing in terms of the power differential, in terms of this overall structural changes taking place in West Asia, well reflected in the diminution of the Pax Americana. Pax Americana became a reality in the wake of 1991, when the United States signed separate security agreement with each and every 6 of the Gulf countries or GCC countries. So it became a kind of reality, but you find sufficient indication of diminution or diminishing the role of United States of America. You have Syria, where the 5 countries' presence are well embedded. You have Turkey on north, you have Russia in the middle, you have Iran, you have other countries as well. So in a situation, what could be described as complete strategically messy and politically uncertain, extremely difficult to deal with the problems that arise because of the given structural peculiarity of West Asia. The structural peculiarity of West Asia, and which could be explained in terms of, remember, 1, artificiality of the state. Number 2, because of undefined national identity. Number 3 is the permanent conflict or the clash between the territory-based nationalism on the one side and the ethnic nationalism. Okay, that is Iraqi vis-a-vis Arab identity, or Syrian vis-a-vis Arab identity. And third, in terms of the political system, the polity, which are either monarchical or authoritarian. But the external powers need to refrain from encouraging or superimposing any kind of political system in an attempt to mold all this country into their kind of system, that is liberal democratic system, and the region paid a heavy price for that. Let it be more progressive and incremental. I'm not here suggesting or underlining the so-called Asian model of development, but let that happen over a period of time, rather than the people from outside trusting any kind of system which would lead to the further destabilization. And we have seen what happened in Syria, what is happening in Yemen today, what happened in Libya. So we should refrain from forcing any kind of system. That is what the Indian policymakers have been consistently taking the position so far the promotion of democracy is concerned. We do not subscribe to the grand idea of democratic peace, because we find that the reflection of the Western hubris and typical hypocrisy. When it comes to China, the Americans are worried about promoting so-called democracy out there. Only very recently, under President Trump, they began to talk about human rights violation, indicative of this new law regarding Tibet. But until then, what are they doing? They had a deepening of the economic interdependence without being concerned about the human rights record of China. Okay, without being concerned about the expansionist idea or ideology, reflected in the policy in the ideology of China, particularly under Xi Jinping, called the Tianjia, which is absolutely expansionist. So in a way, what I'm saying, that Indian policy towards West Asia under Prime Minister Modi had the 3 dimensions where I would end here. One is non-interference, equidistance, and that we try to scrupulously maintain the equidistance so far the bilateral conflict in the region is concerned. But at the same time, we try to transform qualitatively our bilateral relation, especially with the Arab Gulf states, from the typical economic into a multifaceted. And we do try to have our, we try to also derive some kind of benefit, what somebody recently called Khaliji capital. That is a financial capital accumulation that is taking place in some of these Gulf countries like Saudi Arabia and UAE. We want the share of that capital be invested in India, and the process is already on. All of you are well aware of it. And the third is the cultural connectivity. So India needs to also promote its soft power. You see, if the 8 to 9 million expatriates represent what I often call the cultural capital of India abroad, then the history of civilizational linkages have left the footprints, the historical footprints in West Asia. So this needs to be strengthened, and that is to be based on the bilateral appreciation of each other. And we expect, at least I hope the government of India will encourage to the Indian Council for Cultural Relation to promote the idea of Bharat, how Bharat represents celebration of diversity. Here, when you talk about culture, it dissolves the cradle differences. Bharat is not simply a nation state, it is an idea. How this idea is different from the idea of China or the idea of West, that distinction has to be brought to the fore. If India rises, it should not create panic among any other, whether dominant power or the dominated ones. Because India aspires for the new status called the Jagat Guru, that is dispeller of ignorance. That has been the historical role that India has played otherwise for millennia. So India is not to be seen either as a rising benevolent or a malevolent global power, as simply a dispeller of ignorance. The Bharata, basically it's a knowledge society, it embraces all humanity, all corner of the world. Its message is meant for the entire world, not for a particular religion or a sect. That message has to be appreciated, has to be disseminated all across. And third is, we need to have this, enduring partnership with some of the Gulf countries, so far as security is concerned. Because today, India is in the cusp of a bigger change. We are trying, I'm quite sure the policymakers are trying hard to redefine our security relationship. We are today confronted with not simply two-front war, 2.5 war. We have the naysayers, we have the radical outspits in the country. Whatever we do, they are the ones to stand up to oppose it. They do not share the vision our honorable Prime Minister has. They do not, they just spare no effort to stand up against Prime Minister Modi, just simply drop of a hat. If you see the reaction coming from the opposition party last year, and following the $400 billion so-called deal between China and Iran, oh, India is going to lose Chabar, India is going to lose so much economically. What are you going to gain, by getting closer to the Arab countries, the Gulf countries? We can't change them. Kind of look at this kind of cynicism. So what I'm trying to tell you here is we are today redefining our military strategic relationship. I'm not a strategist, so I know little about that. But we need to also underline that our strategic imperatives are likely to determine to great extent the future India's policy trajectory with all the countries, including the United States of America. We are determined to get these anti-missiles from Soviet Union's S-400 because our prime concern is to ensure the territorial integrity and the sovereignty of the country against any potential threat, be it across the border from China or Pakistan or both together. So you have to see our bilateral relation with West Asian country in the larger perspective, that is security. Second, India's aspiration as a global power to reckon with as an ideological power, as a power to dispel ignorance, a power to embrace each and every community and every country. And third is the economic development, in which technology would be as a kind of facilitator. So we here stand for the shared prosperity. And this is simply not rhetoric, the way Chinese have been, last, like decades trying to sell us. The shared vision, the Asian centuries, these are all poppycock. We know what the Chinese are up to. So these are not simply slogans. We believe firmly in this. We are trying to translate these ideas into action, well reflected in India's foreign policy globally and towards West Asia in particular. Thank you very much, my friends, for your great initiative, for a kind of making a dispassionate assessment of India's West Asia policy under Prime Minister Modi. But my only submission is, when you try to analyze and assess foreign policy behavior of a rising power like India, we need to take into account the essential factor in which we have to look at Prime Minister Modi. Okay, his vision, because in India things are quite different. The way you would define leadership different from the way the Americans define leadership. The leadership is largely rooted in our values. What are the values? Renunciation, renounce things, sacrifices. These are the sources of your charisma. If this man today held as the most charismatic leader globally because of these factors, which is very much original to Indian civilization, Bharatiya civilization, renounce things. You live like a commoner. You reach out to people everywhere. See, regardless of your status, your location in society, social hierarchy. So, and second aspect is the product of what movement? He is a product of a post-Congress ideological movement, which is indigenous, authentic, which is rooted culturally, that is in Sanatani religion, or Sanatani belief, not a religion. We need to underline again, the majority religion of the country is not Hinduism. It's not a religion in first place. It's a Sanatani belief. It's a product of that kind of ideological movement which propels him to take this country forward. So is basically his whole worldview is quite different from the worldview of the leaders who dominated India's political systems in 1947. Okay, we try to redefine the civilizational exceptionalism in a different way, not the way Nehru used to look at the world. So that is well reflected in a foreign policy when it makes a shift from idealism to realism. Okay, civilization exceptionalism cannot be used the way the European elite used to do it as an excuse, okay, not to be proactive, all the time to creep and complain as some trade union leader globally. No, the time has come for India to become a rule maker than simple rule follower. Let India also share the responsibility of setting global agenda, becoming assertive, whether in WTO or any multilateral forum. Let India take an initiative in forming new minilateral based on a specific issue. Let India also take lead in what I call placing itself in emerging asymmetrical global order, where his voice should be heard, and it is being heard today. And that is the reason I think Prime Minister Modi today has come out with a new policy that is Atmanirbhar Bharat. That doesn't necessarily imply India's return to protectionism, the way critics say it. No, you build up infrastructure, you industrial base in such a way you are not subordinated, you are not, overflowed with all the manufactured products coming from all over, particularly from China. You become more competitive. You become self-dependent in a situation like the pandemic that we experienced recently. So in a way, you find is a causal connectivity between the domestic policy and India's external policy behavior under Prime Minister Modi. These are interlinked. That's not seen separately. That's what I'm trying to say. They're causally linked. And in that broader canvas, I am quite sure you will come out with your own project highlighting the changes and these are not minor changes. The changes which are long-term implication in terms of elevating India's global status, in terms of, I'm telling you, change in the global perception of India as a power. Position of capacity doesn't make you powerful. Okay, position and projection of power resources do not make you powerful. What makes you powerful? Only when there is a change in the perception of others about the power holder. I often talk about the three dimension of power: position, projection, and perception. India's external policy behavior in the last 14 years has brought about a change in the global perception of India as a power. I get your point. So this is also to an extent reflected in its West Asia policy. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. This was truly a brilliant address, keynote address, and really you set the stage, a template of sorts for all the authors to actually incorporate many of these ideas into our respective chapters. Thank you very much, sir. You really took time out and shared your, and again showed to all of us why you are the leading authority on West Asia in the country, obviously known globally. And thank you again. Without further delay, I now, since we are already, this is rather a delay, I now request Mrs. Bhavna Dabhade, the founder of the Indian Futures, to present a formal vote of thanks. Over to you, Bhavna.
Thanks, Manish. Am I audible?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, good morning all. Let me begin by profusely thanking Honorable Shri Muraleedharan ji for his very enlightening inaugural address today. Knowing his very busy schedule, it's indeed a privilege to have him with us today. I would also like to thank Professor Mohapatra for the top-class keynote address today. Most importantly, we would like to thank Ambassador Trigunayat Sir, President MIICCIA, who readily agreed to join us as an associate partner for the event and chair our plenary diplomats roundtable 2 that will be held at 5 p.m. today. A big thanks to embassies of Israel and UAE for joining us as partners too. Finally, a big thanks to all our participants who have joined today from different parts of India and the world. Some on Zoom and scores on YouTube, where we are live streaming. Looking forward to your continued support and encouragement. That means so much for us. Please follow us on Twitter and Facebook at the Indian Futures for all our program past and forthcoming. Thank you. Now we move to our first author session in a couple of minutes. Stay zoomed. Thank you.